Thank you. I'd like to start with giving the Secretariat the floor for housekeeping announcements, and good morning to everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the reception, and we thank the EU for it. That'll serve as the thank you for everyone, so that we can save time and not do thank yous today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few housekeeping announcements. There are some meetings and working groups that are formed for today. The ones that we know as of now, first one is the working group on zoonotic diseases. This will take place today from 12:15 to 13:45 in room 3, which is located at level -1. This is room 3, level -1, working group on zoonotic diseases. Also, today during lunchtime, 12:15 to 13:45, we have the Finance and Budget Subcommittee, which will be meeting in room 12 on second floor, room 12, level 2. This evening, we have the drafting group of the access to funding taking place at 5 p.m., 1700. And we also have, starting at 17:15, the Mike Asia, which will have the closed meeting in room 11. This is Mike Asia, closed meeting by invitation only in room 11. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And with that, now we'll begin today's agenda. We left off yesterday afternoon with the introduction of document 33.5, application of Article 13 in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we had heard from the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I now open the floor to standing committee members to comment on this document, and we are considering the recommendations contained in paragraphs 26 and 27 of the document. Thank you. I see Belgium. I turn to Belgium to open the discussion.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. The EU and its member states want to congratulate DRC for the progress made. We support all the recommendations, but have one addition to recommendation 26A, little Roman I, little Roman 2, sorry. It's clear that the illegal trade in African grey parrots is still ongoing, and no prosecution seem to have taken place in the DRC related to the species. The recommendation to adopt a regulatory act to implement the moratorium, which was part of the recommendation adopted at SC 77, was not fulfilled, unless this would be covered by the changes to the law in DRC adopted in December, to which they refer to in their intervention yesterday evening. Presuming that this is not covered by that change in the law, we would like to ask to reinsert the following text at the end of recommendation 26AII, so that it ends with, and it invites the Democratic Republic of the Congo to adopt a regulatory act to implement the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Israel, who is acting for Georgia today.
Thank you, Chair. We note that the Democratic Republic of Congo issued a reservation for this species, and therefore, according to the rules, it's seen as a country as if the species is in Appendix 2. And in The document, the DRC states that they are not implementing its reservation, so we would also like to call on the DRC to withdraw its reservation if, in sense, they've put a stop to it. And perhaps here at this meeting, the DRC would be able to make that kind of an announcement. If not, we would still support the comments by Belgium to include that text into recommendation 2. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the UK.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The UK is pleased to note the progress the Secretariat has reported in this document, particularly the designation of a new CITES management authority for the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This is very welcome news. However, we also remain concerned by the continuing reports of significant levels of illegal trade in African grey parrots. As this document outlines, further seizures of African grey parrots, such as those made in Istanbul in August 2024, indicates that exports of African greys are being made under the guise of other parrot species. I would just like to also echo the comments of my colleagues from Belgium and Israel, and we would support the text that Belgium has proposed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other standing committee members? Otherwise, I am now opening the floor to parties, observer parties. I have the USA.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States. The United States applauds the Democratic Republic of the Congo's progress in implementing the Standing Committee's recommendations from SC 77 and the steps it has taken to ensure that its trade in CITES-listed species complies with the requirements of the Convention. We would draw the Committee's attention to our information document, document SC 78, INF 32. We seek the deferment to allow our administration to familiarize itself with the ongoing work of CITES and align any U.S. positions with the new administration's policy goals. To that end, with regard to the recommendation found in paragraph 26A, chapeau of the document, the United States requests that the Standing Committee defer the decision on this recommendation to a future CITES meeting, i.e. SC 79, COP 20, or SC 81. However, the United States supports the recommendations found in subparagraphs I through little iv under paragraph 26A and the remaining recommendations in paragraph 26 and paragraph 27. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have the Central America, open to parties. I have the Central African Republic.
La République centrafricaine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us the floor. We would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the DRC on everything that they have done with respect to this issue. We've taken note of these recommendations and would suggest that the Secretariat continue to support the DRC. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now open the floor. I have New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand joins Belgium, Israel and the United Kingdom in congratulating DRC for the progress made, and we support the recommendations in the document with the amendments proposed by Belgium. We do not support the deferral of this decision as recommended by the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any other observer parties for now, I turn to observer organizations. Have the World Parrot Trust.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is made on behalf of the World Parrot Trust, Pan-African Sanctuary Alliance, I4, WCS, WWF, SSN, and Pro Wildlife. We share the concerns voiced by members of the Standing Committee regarding the scale of capture, transport, and illegal exports of grey parrots from the DRC. This Appendix 1 species has undergone dramatic population declines and has all but disappeared from multiple countries as a result of illegal and unsustainable trade. We recognise the progress being made to implement some of the recommendations made at SC 77 and congratulate the DRC on recent repatriations of parrots and primates seized in transit countries. While welcome, these measures are insufficient. Monitoring of consignments at a single regional airport indicate that since SC 77, at least 17,000 grey parrots have been trapped, almost certainly for illegal export. And recent survey data from within the DRC show declines in populations, even within protected areas. This species can't wait for action. Multiple provincial administrations have recently issued decrees unequivocally prohibiting the capture and trade of grey parrots, and these welcome actions raise questions about why a similar measure has not been implemented at the national level, where the listing of the species as partially protected makes prosecutions difficult to achieve and creates confusion which is exploited by traffickers. We support the suggestion that the Standing Committee retain a recommendation that the DRC strengthen the regulatory framework for the implementation of CITES, as it is clear that more can and needs to be done in this regard. Finally, we have concerns that commercial trade in Appendix 1 species by reserving parties undermines the effectiveness of the Convention and efforts by the other range states to protect their wild populations. We further question if it is appropriate to recommend the development of NDFs for an Appendix 1 species, particularly in the context of significant ongoing compliance issues. Thank you.
The floor is open. I don't see anyone else speaking, so I will take a pause to sort of sum up where we are on this particular agenda item. All right, I think I can wrap this one up, and I look to the Standing Committee for their agreement with my summary. The Standing Committee notes the progress made by the DRC and thanks them for this work. And then basically we would adopt the recommendations in paragraphs 26, 27 with the amendments proposed by Belgium to ii that invites the DRC to adopt legislation to enact the moratorium. I don't know if I have the exact wording, but that was the gist. And then we adopt the recommendations in B, C, and D. So that is my suggestion, my summary. I see nodding heads, so we can conclude this agenda item. Thank you. Oh, and paragraph 27, that the Democratic Republic of Congo should report to the Secretariat on the progress made at the 81st meeting of the Standing Committee. My apologies for omitting that one. Thank you. I see the U.S.
Thank you, Chair. Since the committee has decided not to defer the decision to a future meeting with respect to the recommendation to maintain the recommended trade suspension, the United States notes that it is not able to take a position at this time. This is without prejudice to our ability to express positions on this matter in the future, pending further guidance from our administration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item 33.7, the application of Article 13 in Guinea. And I give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce this document.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The document summarizes progress made by Guinea in the implementation of the Standing Committee's recommendations with respect to the application of Article 13. The document provides an update with respect to every recommendation based on the country's report, as well as some general remarks. On the whole, progress has been made with respect to a number of recommendations, particularly technical recommendations. There is a need for yet further effort, particularly with respect to more rapid decision-taking. The government is invited to implement decisions made recently. Paragraphs 39 and 40 of the document provide our recommendations to the SC. Thank you.
Thank you. I note Guinea is not present at SC 78. I don't know if any of the African Standing Committee members would like to take the floor before I open it up to the rest of the Standing Committee. Not seeing any requests, I go to the Standing Committee members for any comments on this document. And again, the recommendations are contained in paragraphs 39 and 40 of the document. I open the floor to party observers, observer parties. I have Senegal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senegal takes note of the document presented by the Secretariat. Guinea is a neighbor of ours, and we would welcome this problem being solved because it does lead to difficulties with respect to convention implementation for us, because they are neighbors and there are some difficulties with keeping track of border activity. We therefore support the recommendations. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I have the USA.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States appreciates Guinea's efforts to address the issues outlined in the document, as well as the Secretariat's work in reviewing this matter. We, with regard to the recommendations found in 39A of the document for the parties to continue to suspend all trade in CITES listed species from Guinea for commercial purposes, the United States requests that the Standing Committee defer this decision on the recommendation to a future meeting, i.e. SC 79, COP 20, or SC 81. We seek deferment to allow our new administration to familiarize itself with the ongoing work of CITES and align any U.S. positions with the new administration's policy goals. The United States does support the revised and updated recommendations found in paragraph 39, subparagraph B through K. We further support the request that Guinea submit a report on its implementation of the recommendations before SC 81. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I ask the Standing Committee members to note what the U.S. has requested on this. Moving on to observer parties. Observer organizations. I will take a minute here to pause and consult with the Secretariat and then sum up our discussion. So the chair, basically, having heard the discussion, I look to the Standing Committee members for their agreement with my summary, which will be that that I heard no opposition to the Secretariat's recommendations in paragraph 39 and 40. So the Standing Committee would agree with the adoption of recommendations 39A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And I did not hear anyone voicing support to the U.S. deferring this. I'm looking for if I've captured this correctly, and nodding heads. Oh, sorry, I needed to flip my page. So, again, I'll repeat so we're all clear on what we're adopting. The Standing Committee agrees to the recommendations in paragraph 39A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, and then the Standing Committee further invites to request that Guinea prepare a comprehensive report on the implementation of these recommendations, including the budget and use of the funds mentioned in Recommendation B, and any progress in criminal investigations mentioned in Recommendations E to G, and any other pertinent information and evidence needed to confirm implementation by the Secretariat. Guinea shall submit this report to the Secretariat 90 days before the 81st meeting of the Standing Committee. So I look for the Standing Committee members to seeing support for this adoption, and the Standing Committee agrees to this. I'll conclude this item. Thank you. I see the U.S. would like to speak.
Thank you, Chair. The United States is under a new administration, and we are not able to take a position on the matter at this time. This is without prejudice to our ability to express positions on this matter in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, United States. To be fair on time, can I ask you in the future, if you need to make the same interventions, could you basically inform the committee what the agenda items those interventions that intervention applies to, so that we don't make it each single time when the agenda item comes, because I'm very cognizant of the time and don't want us to really have substantive discussions, and I think everyone is aware of your positions. So if you could please, just perhaps on the next time you make it, say what agenda items it refers to, and we'll note that in the record and move on. Thank you for your patience. The next item on our agenda is 33.8, application of Article 13 in the Laos People Democratic Republic. We are discussing recommendations in paragraphs 70 to 72, and I turn to the Secretariat to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. The document summarizes progress made by Lao People's Democratic Republic in the implementation of recommendations agreed at SC 77. This document presents the Secretariat's conclusions and recommendations concerning Article 13 in Lao PDR. The Standing Committee is invited to consider progress made by Lao PDR and to consider updated recommendations contained in paragraph 70 and 71, including a recommendation that parties continue to suspend trade with Lao PDR in specimens of all CITES listed species for commercial purpose until Lao PDR has substantially achieved the recommendations. It is proposed that the case be reviewed again at SC 79. The Secretariat notes that Lao PDR submitted additional documentation on Sunday and yesterday, some of which is in Lao language and will be provided in English in the coming weeks for the Secretariat's review. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. I give the floor to Lao People's Democratic Republic to speak on this document 33.8.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the governments of Lao PDR, we would like to express our deepest gratitude to the CITES Secretariat, as well as the development and non-government partner for their invaluable technical assistance and project support in helping us to fulfill our cited commitment. Lao PDR has strengthened its legal framework, achieving Category 1 in the cited national legislation project, a milestone demonstrating full legislative compliance. Lao PDR had intensified enforcement leading to conviction of crime like illegal ivory trade, possession of sun bear carcasses. We work with ASEAN and our neighbor on cross-border enforcement, partnering with the international entity like EU, US, UK, France, and organizations like WCS, FAO, IUCN, UNODC to enhance our conservation effort. Lao PDR has partnered with different partners to start a stabilization program for captive tiger across the country, except for Panthera tigris cobatic, will remain under ongoing identification to ensure controlled breeding practice. Lao PDR has enhanced elephant legislation marking to ensure traceability. Our cross-border in-situ conservation partnership with China demonstrates effective international cooperation. The trade suspension on CITES list species has significantly impacted Lao PDR, affecting over 40,000 hectares of acar wood plantation owned by Lullapur farmer in Lao PDR, as well as legally engaged wildlife farm. This has introduced major economic, social, ecological challenges impacting our progress towards UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. We invite the Secretariat to conduct a ground visit to Lao PDR to observe this impact firsthand. Given the profound implication, we respectfully request a comprehensive review and reconsideration of this suspension to ensure a fair and effective approach. Lao PDR has considerable strides in complying with the CITES mandate. To further align our effort with CITES standard, we respectfully request the Secretariat and Standing Committee to consider the following action. First, we acknowledge and appreciate the work of the cited Secretariats and the Standing Committee. Nevertheless, we believe our compliance efforts have not been fully recognized. We urge that the recommendation for suspension be re-evaluated with additional evidence, empirical evidence. The option applied on consultation regarding SC 78 Doc 33.8 had raised concern about transparency of the process. Considering the substantial impacts on our nation, we respectfully request a thorough review, a thoughtful reconsideration of this decision to ensure fairness and effectiveness. Lastly, we respectfully request the immediate lifting of the full trade suspension to enhance effective implementation of our new legal framework by the Lao-cited management, the Science Authority, and the Enforcement Agency. This ongoing suspension poses significant economic and social challenges, impeding our progress towards a UN Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. Should the Standing Committee require further evidence to support your decision, we are well prepared to give you a concrete evidence with me in detail during the working session. We appreciate your continued support and consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I open up the floor now to Standing Committee members to speak on this. I have Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Indonesia, as the Asia Regional Representative, fully supports Lao PDR and their efforts under CITES, notably achieving Category 1 in the CITES National Legislation Project. We commend their rigorous enforcement measures against wildlife crimes and collaborative initiatives with international partners. We would like to take note that the trade suspension on CITES-listed species has significantly impacted Lao PDR, affecting their economic and conservation activities and hindering their progress towards the UN SDGs. Therefore, we support a comprehensive review and reconsideration of the suspension to align with Lao PDR's demonstrated compliance and commitment. Further, Indonesia put emphasis on the importance of Lao PDR's initiative to form a working group with the CITES Standing Committee and Secretariat to facilitate a detailed review of their compliance efforts. We urge the CITES Secretariat and Standing Committee to work collaboratively with Lao PDR, ensuring a transparent process grounded in empirical evidence. This approach will enforce our collective efforts in biodiversity conservation and sustainable development across the region. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have Kuwait, followed by Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Laos has demonstrated significant progress in implementing CITES recommendation, including revision national legislation, enhancing enforcement mechanism, and improving monitoring of captive breeding and wildlife trade. The country has enacted Government Decree number 299, strengthened collaboration between national CITES authority and taking steps to regulate captive breeding. Additionally, Laos has engaged in regional cooperation to combat illegal wildlife trade and implemented stricter measures for protection of the endangered species. These efforts demonstrate a strong commitment to compliance, justify the removal of trade suspension to support sustainable and legal wildlife trade. Therefore, Kuwait, we do not support the recommendation in paragraph 71A and also welcome the invitation of Laos to CITES Secretariat to visit for further evaluation. Thank you, Chair.
I call on Japan, and I would also, given our time, that if your views align with something that has been said by a previous speaker, to basically note that alignment and not read the entire interventions. Thank you. I call on Japan, followed by Israel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a member of the Asia Group, Japan supports Lao PDR. They are making progress and they commit strongly to CITES compliance. We, as an Asia region, including Japan, we request the suspension of trade to be removed. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on Israel, acting for Georgia.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, we support the Secretariat's conclusions and note that there has been progress made by Laos, but the continuing compliance matters, which are summarized in paragraph 68, need to be further addressed. Therefore, we support all the recommendations in paragraph 70, 71, and 72. Thank you.
I will now open the floor to observer parties. I have Vietnam and the EU.
Madam Chair, thank you. Vietnam would like to ally ourselves with the intervention of Indonesia, Japan, and Kuwait made earlier to the Standing Committee to consider lifting the trade suspension on Lao PDR, and to recognize the efforts Laos has made to date in implementing the convention. Thank you, Chair.
I have New Zealand as Oceania, so I will call on them before other parties.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand also congratulates Laos on its Category 1 legislation, and we join with Israel in supporting the Secretariat's recommendations. Thank you.
I call on the USA.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States recognizes Laos with regards to the progress and initial steps on capacity building for CITES authorities, especially for achieving the CITES requirements for national legislation. Again, we draw our committee's attention to our information document and seek to have the recommendation found in subparagraph A and R found in paragraph 71 deferred to a future meeting. the United States supports the remaining recommendations in paragraph 71 and the recommendations in paragraph 72.
Thank you. I call on the EU.
Thank you. The EU and its member states would like to acknowledge the efforts made by Lao PDR and the progress made. We note the report and the recommendations from the Secretariat, and also that several compliance matters remain. But we note also the information provided by Lao, and we would be open to consider reviewing recommendations and seeing if there is anything that can be, for instance, partially addressed. Thank you.
I've got several parties wishing to speak on this important matter. Time is of the essence, so I ask you to either express your support of what Lao has said, aligning yourself with the Asian SC members, or what we've heard from some other standing committee members, which is to support the Secretariat's recommendation. I'm trying to get a sense on and allow everyone to speak, but anyway, okay. So I have the Russian Federation, followed by Cambodia.
Thank you, Madam. Good morning. With regards to the case of Lao PDR, we would like to welcome the efforts and substantial progress achieved by Laos in ensuring compliance with CITES provisions. Its government has undertaken legislative and normative reforms with a view to increasing effectiveness of implementation of the convention.
Sorry to interrupt you, Russian Federation, but I've been instructed to keep us on time, and so I'm asking you to basically state in a few words what position you fall into without reading the whole intervention. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. We support the statement by Laos and stress the need to give thorough review to its efforts with a view to arriving at fair conclusions in this regard. So we support Laos. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking for a sense of supporting Laos or the Secretariat. Cambodia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support Laos and align with position of the Indonesia, Japan, and Kuwait. Thank you.
I have China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China commends the sincere efforts made by Laos, and China supports Laos and in line with the Asian region and many other countries. Thank you.
I have Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Chair, Madam. We support Laos and welcome their progress on legislation and capacity building. Thank you.
I call on Iran, followed by Thailand. Oh, I have the UK, so I'll go to the UK first as a standing committee member.
Please turn off the microphone for Iran and go to the UK, if you mind.
Go to the UK.
Thank you, Chair. We note the progress made by Lao and the support, the efforts that they have made, but we believe that there are some compliance matters that still remain that require addressing, and on that basis we support the Secretariat's recommendations. Thank you.
On Thailand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Thailand share our alignment with Laos and other Asian member countries. Thank you, Chair.
I call on Malaysia.
Thank you, Chair. Malaysia would like to support Laos on the initiative taken and the progress. Thank you.
I have one more standing committee member, Morocco, and then I'm going to close this list and consult with the Secretariat. Morocco.
Merci, Madame la
Thank you, Madam Chair. Morocco supports the efforts and align ourselves with the interventions made by other countries in the Asia region.
I am closing the list to party observers. I will now call on one or two observer organizations, and then I will try to sum up where we are. But if the observer organizations can be very brief, limit your intervention to 1 minute, I would greatly appreciate it. I call on WCS, followed by Born Free.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. This intervention is on behalf of WCS and WWF. We work closely with the government of Lao PDR on site-based conservation work and the implementation of CITES and national counter-wildlife trafficking efforts. We stand ready to work closely with the government of Lao to fully implement the recommendations adopted by this committee in order to resolve the outstanding issues with implementation of CITES. Thank you, Chair.
I have Belgium as a standing committee member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And we have heard many SC members and also parties speaking in favor of support of Lao in regard to the trade suspension, but also some in to keep the trade suspension. And as a compromise, we would like to have more of a discussion on a partial lift of the suspension, mainly on certain plant species with some conditions. And we would ask for maybe a small working group to work that out. That would be our proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And this will be the final intervention before I pause here and consult with the Secretariat. Born Free. And I ask you to limit yourself to 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm making this intervention on behalf of a number of organisations, the names of which have been provided. We support the Secretariat's recommendations to maintain general trade sanctions on Lao PDR and encourage the Standing Committee to continue to monitor the remaining legislative gaps identified by the Secretariat as part of the compliance process. With regards to tigers, we suggest that the recommendation in paragraph 71J is modified to ensure that any conservation breeding of identified pure specimens of tigers belonging to the mainland Southeast Asian lineage is carried out by appropriate ex situ breeding sites and not by the existing tiger farms in Lao PDR. These farms have been set up with a purely commercial motive and are therefore not appropriate facilities to carry out conservation breeding. And we also strongly recommend independent expert verification of any documentation relating to the production of and trade in long-tailed macaques before any consideration is given to lifting trade restrictions. Thank you.
I call on New Zealand as the last standing committee member to speak on this before I pause. And my apologies to Iran, but I think we've had an extensive debate here. So, Oceania.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to support Belgium's suggestion for consideration of a partial lifting of the trade suspension. Thank you. Through a working group, thank you.
I will pause here to consult with the Secretariat and try to propose a way forward. Thank you. Okay, I think we've had extensive debate on this one, and we've clearly heard from the Asian Standing Committee members in support of Laos' recommendation. We also heard from Belgium, Oceania, and others about this creation of a small working group. So what I would like to propose is essentially that recommendation 71A on the trade suspension, that be sent to a small working group to discuss if there is the possibility of a partial lifting of those recommendations. However, I did not hear much discussion from anyone on recommendations C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, P, Q, R, and S, and then finally the further reporting. So not having heard on those recommendations, and also 71B, so I'll repeat it again. We definitely are considering 71A going to a small working group, 71B, and then recommendations C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S. Those basically, there was no discussion of those, and so I look to the Standing Committee if they support those. I know the U.S. Wanted to defer, but I haven't heard any comments on that one. So I'm looking to see if we can adopt, if we can agree to all the other recommendations, and what I would create a working group on would be the trade suspension 71A, and I would give terms of reference out for that working group if I hear support of that. So I look to the Standing Committee members for nodding heads or thumbs up. And I also would look, I see the U.S. is asking to speak, and then I'll also look to see if Lau has any comments before I move ahead. Give the floor to the USA.
Thank you, Chair. The United States also asked for recommendation R to be deferred, and so if that's not agreed upon by the committee, maybe it can also be referred to the working group for discussion.
Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so U.S. would like to defer R. I had proposed to the Standing Committee that I didn't hear any opposition to R on that recommendation. So again, I guess I'm looking for the Standing Committee to go forward with supporting all the recommendations except 71A, that they agree to those. I'm seeing nodding heads. I see Canada is wishing to speak, so I will allow that. And I'm also looking to see if Lau has any reaction to my way forward.
Thank you, Chair, and I apologize as I know you are running short on time. I just wanted some clarification on the mandate of the working group. So you noted that the working group would be looking at 71A, which is the continued trade suspension. It ends with achieved the following recommendations. So are you expecting the working group to refine the types of recommendations in order to indicate where, if any, trade suspension is put in place? And that means I'm to understand that the other recommendations that are agreed are not linked to any trade suspension. Is that correct? Thank you, Chair.
Yes, I believe Canada, you've summed up very well my thinking. That's what I'm looking for, is essentially the working group would deal with 71A, expecting some other recommendations there, particularly in terms of legislation and reporting. But the other recommendations would be agreed to and are not impacted, will not be discussed when I give terms of reference for that working group. Okay, I'm also reminded, I'm seeing the Standing Committee nodding heads, agreeing to that way forward. I will take that as agreement. And I am also reminded that I've forgot paragraph 72, which essentially would recommend the preparation of a compliance plan and the reporting date. So that would be also agreed to. Okay, then I will consult with the Secretariat and read out terms of reference for the working, I guess I should strike the working group first on its composition. My preference is that this working group be limited to standing committee members, and as we said, small amount. So I look for standing committee member, well, first I need a chair. So I look for a volunteer for a chair of this working group. I have Singapore asking to speak.
Yeah, Madam Chair, Singapore will be willing to be the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Singapore. And now I look for a composition of the working group from standing committee members. Sorry, push your button if you would like to be in this working group. So far I have Belgium and Kuwait, Indonesia and the UK, and the USA. That would be all regions, and Nigeria, and Laos. Okay, Nigeria has disappeared, so let me go through this again because I really want it limited to standing committee members. I have Belgium, Indonesia, USA, Morocco, UK, and Kuwait. And with that, that would be the working group that I strike. And Laos, of course, Laos, sorry. Seeing some confusion, so keep your buttons on and I'll go through it one more time. I have Indonesia, USA, UK, Belgium, Kuwait, Morocco. I know Nigeria, you've put your button on, but my understanding, if it's correct, is that you are not a standing committee member. I also have Poland. Sorry, I have to learn to scroll the screen. All right, and Laos. So can I ask the Secretariat to read out the working group so I haven't missed anyone? Sophie.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just read out once more again. The working group is chaired by Singapore with a membership of Lao PDR, Belgium, Kuwait, Indonesia, United States of America, Morocco, United Kingdom, and Poland. Thank you, Chair.
And I will call on the Secretariat to read the terms of reference for the working group.
So the mandate of this working group would be to discuss a possible lifting or partial lifting of the recommendation to suspend trade contained in paragraph 71A of this document. Thank you very much.
And with that, I conclude this agenda item, and we move on to the next one, if you give me a minute. The next agenda item is 33.10, application of Article 13 in Vietnam. And I call upon the Nigeria. Apologies, I flipped the papers too fast. So, we're again still in compliance, application of Article 13 in Nigeria, document 33.9, and I call upon the Secretariat to introduce the document.
Thank you, Chair. The document summarizes the progress made by Nigeria in implementing the Standing Committee recommendations made in Standing Committee 77 regarding the application of Article 13. The Secretariat has included in the document an update for each recommendation based on the report provided by the country and presented its overall remarks. Significant progress is demonstrated, particularly with regard to law enforcement and handling and disposal of seized stockpiles of CITES-listed specimens. Continued and, where appropriate, strengthened efforts are needed in the coming period. The Standing Committee is invited to take note of the progress achieved and to revise and update its recommendations adopted at Standing Committee 77, as set out in paragraphs 37 to 39 of the document. Thank you.
Thank you. I call upon Nigeria.
Madam Chair, the government and people of Nigeria express our deep appreciation to CITES for the opportunity given to us to help meet with CITES compliance matters. Regarding the application of Article 13 in Nigeria, the following is our submission. 1. Nigeria is working on making budgetary provisions to carry out scientific-based non-detriment finding (NDF) of Pterocarpus erinaceus and will provide evidence of adequate legal acquisition findings to the satisfaction of the Secretariat and the Chair of the Standing Committee, having regard to Resolution Conf 18.7. 2. The third and final reading of the passage of the Endangered Species Conservation and Protection Bill is underway, and the Compliance Assistance Program initiatives aim to get the state buy-in to review obsolete laws and forestry legislation in the states to effectively bridge the gap between federal and state legislation. 3. Nigeria will continue to implement national strategies to counter corruption linked to illegal wildlife trade at all levels, including anti-bribery policies, and will further intensify efforts to ensure prohibiting, preventing, detecting, and countering corruption activities conducted in violation of the Convention in accordance to Resolution Conf 17.6. 4. The establishment of the Wildlife Law Enforcement Task Force, WLETF, has strengthened the national interagency coordination and collaboration to control trade in CITES-listed species. The signing of the cooperation agreement between Nigeria and Cameroon in 2024 will further Nigeria's opportunities to combat transnational organized wildlife crime. And lastly, the planned cooperation in combating illegal wildlife and forest crime between Nigeria and Vietnam in signing a memorandum of understanding will further control CITES-listed species illegal trade. 5. Through the assistance of CAP and national funding, Nigeria will ensure the implementation of a secured electronic permitting system to facilitate the issuance of permits and certificates and the integration of LAF and other documentation, making permit falsification difficult. 6. Nigeria will continue to implement adequate control measures to secure storage facilities for seized stocks of CITES-listed species, including for pangolins and ivory, and the disposal of confiscated specimens in line with recommendations as contained in Resolution Conf 17.8. Finally, Madam Chair, Nigeria recognizes the recommendations by the Standing Committee and is committed to be responsive to addressing the recommendations on the application of Article 13 on compliance mechanism in Nigeria. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Nigeria. I now open up the floor to the Standing Committee members, and again, we are commenting on the recommendations in paragraphs 37 to 39. I have Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do acknowledge the progress made by Nigeria and the country's efforts in this regard, and we therefore support the draft recommendations. Thank you.
I open the floor to observer parties. I have Benin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ben, and we'd like to congratulate Nigeria for the progress made and supports these recommendations. Thank you, Madam.
I have Niger.
Merci bien, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Niger would like to congratulate the Federal Republic of Nigeria for all of the good work done and supports the recommendations made. Thank you.
I have the USA.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States acknowledges the progress made by Nigeria related to the legislation and law enforcement, as well as the commitment and engagement of its CITES Management Authority, while also recognizing that much of the work remains to be done as reflected in the Secretariat's recommendations. We seek to defer the decision on this recommendation A in paragraph 37 to a future meeting. This request for deferment applies to the other agenda items as noted in our INFDOC SC 78 INFDOC 32. We still reserve the right to intervene on those items as we deem necessary. In regards to the remaining recommendations in the document found in paragraph 37, B through I, and in paragraph 38 and 39, the United States supports those recommendations.
Thank you. I have Kenya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. From the region, we appreciate the work that Nigeria has put, particularly in enhancing their law enforcement, and the request to continue the transnational law enforcement so that they can deal with the transnational crime is a welcome one, and I think call upon support for Nigeria. We do support all the recommendations as detailed in the document. Thank you.
I call on Senegal.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senegal would like to join those who have congratulated Nigeria for all of the efforts they've made. We are in the region and have had exchanges with the focal point, and we know that there are some shipments that have been stopped in Niger, shipments from Nigeria. So we would like to see some work between Nigeria and Niger so that they can clear up these border difficulties with respect to illegal trade. Thank you.
I open it to observer organizations. I have WCS.
Thank you, Chair. WCS works very closely with the government of Nigeria and relevant authorities on intelligence-driven anti-poaching and law enforcement efforts, among other interventions at Yankari Game Reserve in Bauchi State, as well as Cross River National Park and the broader landscape in Cross River State. We welcome the progress reported by Nigeria, and we look forward to continued cooperation and the timely adoption of the Endangered Species Conservation and Protection Bill, ideally this year. Thank you, Chair.
With that, I'll close the list. I'll consult with the Secretariat for a moment and get back to the Standing Committee. So it is, in my summary, I look for the Standing Committee to agree with the recommendations found in paragraphs 37 through 39. I did not hear any support for deferment. And therefore, the Standing Committee would agree to the recommendations in 37, 38, and 39. And that's my summary of this discussion. I'm looking for concurrence from the Standing Committee members. I see nodding heads, and so we will adopt the recommendations, agree to the recommendations from the Secretariat in paragraphs 37 through 39. And we're during the last agenda item from yesterday, document 33.10, application of Article 13 in Vietnam. And I will call on the Secretariat to introduce this document.
Thank you, Chair. The document presents the conclusion of the Secretariat's mission to Vietnam in January 2025 and recommendations on the application of Article 13 in Vietnam. Based on the Secretariat's finding during the mission, and given that the situation of Vietnam is further reviewed under other processes that the Standing Committee will consider, the Standing Committee is invited to commend the efforts made by Vietnam to implement the Convention and agree with the conclusion of the Secretariat that there is currently no evidence of compliance issues to be addressed under Article 13 concerning Vietnam. To enhance Vietnam's efforts, the Standing Committee is further invited to consider certain additional recommendations in specific areas where improvements could be made, such as disposal and management of stockpiles of confiscated specimens and enforcement. Thank you, Chair.
I understand Vietnam is not present, or they are present. I will call on Vietnam.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. Actually, Vietnam is here. So Vietnam is making the intervention, firstly, to show our gratitude to the hard work of the Secretariat in implementing the mission in a close collaboration with the National Management Authority of Vietnam. A Standing Committee 77th meeting, Vietnam welcomed the second technical mission with a renewed mandate extended to other species, aside from the chat in timber, resulting in a work plan that was expected to cover every topic concerning about Vietnam. The mission had been conducted robustly with a comprehensive participation of relevant stakeholders. Vietnam is delighted to perceive that the Secretariat found the mission had been implemented in a transparent and consistent manner. Madam Chair, Vietnam welcomed the mission, expecting the Secretariat to have a thorough study and examination to clarify any possibly ungrounded allegations to the country, not only in the trade of timbers, but also other trades. Through the study of the 13-page document, Vietnam is grateful that the Secretariat has provided to a crystal clear, firm, and objective view on the matters. Vietnam is also thankful for your acknowledgement on the comprehensive efforts in various activities in implementing the Convention. While Vietnam wishes for your consideration to exit the Article Roman 13 reviews process, we understand that there is always room for improvement. Therefore, we would like to ally ourselves with the recommendations made under paragraph 67, 68, and 69 to the present document. However, we propose that the reporting obligation under paragraph 70 might be amended. The reason is that most of the topics raised under the recommendations have been covered in other reporting requirements, such as stockpiles, pangolins, enforcement, capacity building, demand reduction, and the NIAP progress report, the rhinoceros report, and annual illegal trade report, and so on. Accordingly, Vietnam proposed the Standing Committee to amend the text of paragraph 70 as follows, I quote, "Finally, the Standing Committee may wish to invite Vietnam to report on any action taken to implement these recommendations, to be integrated with related reports 90 days before SC 81, unquote." Madam Chair, we thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you, Vietnam, and I now open the floor to the Standing Committee members on this agenda item, and we are looking at the recommendations in paragraphs 60 to 70 with an amendment by Vietnam to paragraph 70. I have Indonesia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Republic of Indonesia supports the Secretariat's recommendation, acknowledging that there is no evidence of Vietnam's non-compliance with the Convention. Thank you.
I have the USA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking on behalf of the North America region, the North America region commends Vietnam for its efforts to implement the Standing Committee's recommendations and improve its capacity to implement CITES and combat illegal trade in CITES-listed plants and animals. We concur with the Secretariat's conclusion that there is currently no evidence of compliance issues to be addressed under Article 13 of the Convention concerning Vietnam, and we support the recommendations found in paragraphs 68 and 69. We also remind Vietnamese authorities that they may seek confirmation from relevant management authorities on the basis for making any CITES-required determinations to ensure that shipments for import meet CITES requirements when they have questions concerning the shipment or the accompanying CITES documents. With regard to the amendments suggested by the delegation of Vietnam concerning the recommendation in paragraph 70, the North America region supports the amendments proposed by Vietnam. Thank you, Chair.
Call on Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. And we want to thank the Secretariat for preparing the report, and we want to thank Vietnam for all the steps that has been taken to address the question raised in the previous standing committees. We also note the finding of the Secretariat that no evidence of a non-compliance has been found, and we support the recommendations directed to Vietnam to improve implementation and enforcement. However, given that no compliance case is opened, Vietnam should not report because it falls outside of the compliance procedure. So therefore, we would agree with the amendments of Vietnam to paragraph 70. Thank you.
I have Oceania, then followed by the UK.
Thank you, Chair. New Zealand also commends Vietnam for its work implementing CITES, and we support its recommendations to recommendation 70 on reporting requirements to avoid duplication of reporting to Standing Committee 81. Thank you.
I call on the UK.
Thank you, Chair. The UK would also like to voice our congratulations with Vietnam on the work it's done, and would also wish to support its suggestion so as to avoid duplication of reporting. Thank you.
I will now open the floor to observer parties. I've gotten a good sense of where the Standing Committee members fall on this agenda item, but I do want to give everyone a chance to speak. I ask you to be brief and perhaps align yourself with previous speakers. So I call on China.
Thank you, Madam Chair. China notes that the Secretariat has neither found or received evidence of compliance issues currently existing in Vietnam that should be addressed under Article 13 of the Convention. Sentiments by some organizations that are not supported by the facts cannot justify further action towards Vietnam. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I will now open the floor to observer organizations. Not seeing any requests, I turn to Vietnam. I've been asked if you could kindly repeat very slowly so we can capture it, your amendment to paragraph 70, because there seems to be support from the Standing Committee to amend that, and so I want to be sure I capture it correctly. So could you please repeat your edits to paragraph 70? I call on Vietnam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the amendment to the text of paragraph 70 is as follows, quote, finally, comma, the Standing Committee may wish to invite Vietnam to report on any action taken to implement these recommendations
to be integrated with related reports 90 days before SC 81, full stop, unquote. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vietnam. I will pause a minute to consult with the Secretariat, and I think we can conclude this shortly. Okay, having heard this discussion, I'm looking to the Standing Committee now to agree with what I'm going to say or disagree. In paragraph 67, the Standing Committee commends the significant efforts made by Vietnam and agrees with the conclusion of the Secretariat that there is currently no evidence of compliance issues to be addressed under Article 13 of the Convention concerning Vietnam. Then we adopt all the recommendations in paragraphs 68 and 69. And then paragraph 70, we would adopt, the Standing Committee would invite Vietnam to submit a report with the amended text that we heard from Vietnam. So I'm looking for the Standing Committee to agree with that way forward. Seeing nodding heads and smiles, we will move on and commend Vietnam. Thank you. We are caught up, and we are now on Tuesday morning's agenda. We have document 33.1 is our first agenda item of the morning. This is the implementation of Article 13 and Resolution Comp 14.3, Rev Cop 19 on CITES compliance procedures, Resolution Comp 11.3, Rev Cop 19, again, document 33.1, and I turn to the Secretariat to introduce this document.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, colleagues. In this document, the Secretariat provides inter alia an update on the compliance matter with respect to the United Kingdom and the European Union concerning trade in specimen of captive bred animal species. With regard to the EU, I note that the revised regulation described in paragraphs 15 to 17 was adopted last week and is available as information document 21. The present document also provides an update on the trade in 3 parrot species that was considered at SC 77 based on information provided by Brazil and Germany. Please note that Germany has pointed out a couple of inaccuracies in paragraphs 39 and 40. The document further identifies potential compliance matters in Suriname and Cambodia and brings to the attention of the committee concerns with regard to legal acquisition findings for export of ocean white-tip sharks. I'm pleased to inform the committee that Suriname has already extended an invitation to the Secretariat to conduct a mission to Suriname should the committee agree to provide such a mandate to the Secretariat. As requested by SC 77, the Secretariat is proposing a draft decision to develop guidance on the scope and application of recommendations to suspend trade, as well as a template for a compliance action plan to be annexed to the resolution on science compliance procedures. The committee is invited to consider the recommendations contained in paragraph 74, to which I have 2 updates.
With respect to paragraph 74E, I would like to inform the committee that a meeting took place last night between Germany, Brazil, and a few other parties. I would therefore like the committee not to consider paragraph E of the recommendations until document SC78, document 64, has been considered by the committee. Finally, with respect to paragraph 74K, please note that Cyprus has recently provided the requested information to Guyana and can therefore be deleted from this subparagraph. Thank you, Chair.
So the way I will proceed with this document, it is quite a lengthy document. I will do each of the countries or suggestions one by one. So when you ask to speak, I will ask you to speak on that particular issue. So we will start with the implementation of Article 7, Paragraph 4 of the Convention by the European Union and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, in which case we have 3 recommendations before us, little a, b, and c. And so I open the floor to standing committee members wishing to speak on this one. And I ask people to be concise and brief. Thank you. Looking for either support or changes. Thank you. I will open the floor to observer parties. Oh, I have Israel.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 74, little c, we are recalling resolution Conf 12.10, and then the verb is to invite parties to restrict imports. We feel that the verb invite is not appropriate here. We're not actually inviting them. We're reminding the parties of their obligation to restrict imports for primarily commercial purposes to those produced by operations included in the CITES register. So we would delete the word invite, and we would change remind parties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I call on the U.S.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to recommendation A, we would support noting the progress. With regard to recommendation C, we would support the amendment just suggested by the delegation of Israel. And then with regard to recommendation B, under this suite of recommendations, the United States appreciates the updates that have been provided by the European Union and the United Kingdom regarding their implementation of Resolution Conf 12.10 Rev Cop 15. And in light of that, we do not believe that they need to be invited to provide a report to SC 81. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I call on Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Before my specific comment, I would like to remind that Article 13 provides for actions to be taken when there is a concern that a species is being affected adversely by trade, or that the provisions of the present convention are not being effectively implemented. We also remind parties that we have resolutions to provide guidance, but the obligations reside in the text of the convention. With this regard, Canada can accept the amendment made by Israel to paragraph C, although we prefer paragraph C as written, and we align ourselves with the North American region in not feeling that paragraph B, the recommendation for continued reporting, is unnecessary. Thank you.
I open the floor to observer organizations. Not seeing any requests. We'll give an update where I think we are on this one. I've heard acceptance of paragraph A. I have heard support for paragraph C, and basically we can accept Israel's edit to remind, although there's a preference for invite, but they said they could accept, remind. And I've heard deletion of paragraph B. That's where I'm falling out right now. I look to the standing committee members if they can agree to that. I'm seeing nodding heads, and so we can move on to the next case. Next case, as the Secretariat has said, we are going to table little e because of the discussions that are ongoing, and when we talk about document 64, we'll come back to the Spix's Macaw. So basically here we're looking at regarding potential compliance matters related to trade in Amazona imperialis and Amazona aracusia, which, forgive me if I don't pronounce my scientific names right, but the redneck parrot. And D is the recommendation. We note that no further information or response has been provided by Dominica regarding the export of these 2 specimens of Amazona imperialis and the 10 specimens of Amazona arustica, the redneck parrot. So, is there agreement on any, I guess I will open the floor to the standing committee members on this one. We'll move on to observer parties. I will move on to, I have the US and then I have Japan.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States supports noting that additional information has not been received from Dominica regarding the export of specimens of the 2 Amazona species. Noting that the Secretariat is continuing to work with Dominica in the context of the National Legislation Project, the United States would support requesting it to continue seeking information from Dominica regarding these exports and report to SC 79. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see Japan has withdrawn its request. It may be on another issue in this document. I will open the floor to observer parties. Observer organizations. Not seeing any requests, I would consult with the Secretariat in regard to what the U.S. has suggested, if that can be included. I'm seeing nodding heads from the Secretariat, so we can amend that recommendation, and they will continue to communicate with Dominica, in which case Standing Committee agrees with recommendation D, with the caveat put in encouraging Dominica to report. The Secretariat will continue those communications. I look to the Standing Committee to agree. I'm seeing nodding heads. We'll move on to the next one, which is regarding trade in live animals to India. We're looking at recommendation F. And I open the floor to the Standing Committee members. I open the floor to observer parties. And I have India.
Thank you, Chair. India would like to apprise the matter regarding the trade in live animals to India, as mentioned in document 33.1. India has a robust system for implementation of the provisions of CITES while permitting trade of live animals listed in appendices. This involves clearances from various ministries, including the Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Animal Husbandry, Fisheries and Dairying, and the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. The comments and views from different scientific authorities such as the Central Zoo Authority, Wildlife Crime Bureau, Wildlife Institute of India, Zoological Survey of India, including the state forest departments, are also obtained. The CITES permits are issued by the Management Authority of India after verifying the source and purpose codes. The facility mentioned in the document is a recognized center for taking up conservation breeding of various species by the Centers of Authority of the Government of India. We would also like to inform that the Standing Committee that the CITES Management Authority had previously extended an invitation to the CITES Secretariat to consider the sending of a team to visit the facility. India further reiterates its invitation to CITES mission to visit the facility. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other observer parties wishing to speak? I open to observer organizations. I have SSN followed by IWMC. I give the floor to the Species Survival Network, SSN.
Thank you, Chair. This is on behalf of AWI, ADM Capital Foundation, 4Paws, PASA, Pro Wildlife, SSN, World Parrot Trust, and Whale and Dolphin Conservation. We are concerned that the recommendation made by SC 77 for the Secretariat to conduct a mission to India has not been carried out, despite reports indicating that a significant number of animals, including species listed in Appendix 1, continue to be transferred to or sought by Green Zoological Rescue and Rehabilitation Center Society, or Vantara. So we would recommend that the Standing Committee reinstate its recommendation for the mission to India. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on IWMC.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You may be surprised that I say that we are very much in agreement with what the previous speaker said, and we'd like to add a question. Does India verify that imports that come of specimens from Appendix 1 that are said to be bred in captivity come from facilities that have been registered with the Secretariat of the Convention? If that is not the case, perhaps we should add to the recommendations the fact that this resolution should be also adopted with regard to India. Thank you.
I don't know if India wishes to respond to that question. I'm seeing a nod at India asking for the floor. I'll turn to India.
Thank you, Chair. The facility which was mentioned by the organization is in fact a registered center with the Central Zoo Authority of the Government of India and also with the CITES. So all those centers which are undertaking imports of species which are listed in the Appendix 1 for conservation breeding are all registered. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we've had discussion on this. Would like to consult with the Secretariat on. I heard India saying that they would welcome a visit. I will go, and I know we haven't heard from Standing Committee members on that suggestion, so think about that one and let me consult. Having consulted with the Standing Committee, I understand there was no mandate from the Standing Committee for them to undertake such a mission. So if I again look to the Standing Committee, if I know India has invited you, but if it were to be done, it's work on the Secretariat and resources, and so that direction would need to come from the Standing Committee. I've not heard any member suggesting that. And so what I'm hearing right now from the Standing Committee is support for recommendation F as written. Am I capturing that correctly? I see Israel. Oh, yeah, I have Israel wanting to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We would support what was proposed by the observer organizations and what India has referred to, so we would support the mission as it was in the previous mandate. Thank you.
Okay, I have a request from the Green Zoological Rescue and Rehabilitation Center to speak, so I will ask them to take the floor.
Madam Chair, this would be an invite, and it would be my honor to invite the CITES body to come to India, the mission to come to India to our facility and check it out. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Appreciate the invitation, but I guess I still look for the Standing Committee to give that mandate to the Secretariat, knowing that it does take time and resources, both people and monetary. And so far, I've heard from one Standing Committee member that they would support such a mission. So I look for other Standing Committee members. I have Oceania, followed.
Thank you. We would just like to add our support to that mission and thank India for welcoming it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I woke you all up. I now have the UK and then Brazil.
Thank you. We'd also welcome and support that mission.
I have Brazil.
We will also support the mission. Thank you.
And lastly, I will take Honduras on this one as a party observer.
On behalf of Central America, we are fully in agreement, and I'd like to take advantage of India's invitation so that we can witness this progress. Thank you.
My apologies, Honduras was speaking as a Standing Committee member. So now I've got a sense from the Standing Committee that there is support for a visit to this. I think we have to modify the language in the present recommendation or create a new recommendation. So let me consult with the Secretariat on how best to word this mission. Okay, I'll ask you to agree with this in spirit, and I will work with the Secretariat to get the language absolutely correct. But we would add to paragraph F, where there is now a semicolon, and subject to the availability of external funding and resources, the Secretariat will undertake a technical mission to the Green Zoological Rescue and Rehabilitation Center in India. Do I have agreement on that? And nodding heads. Okay, thank you. We will move on. We will move on to the next one, paragraph G, regarding trade in live birds from Suriname. And I open the floor. I will ask the Secretariat to introduce this. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I think I already introduced it. Basically, Suriname read the report, and based on this report, had already extended an invitation to the Secretariat should the Standing Committee agree to the recommendation set out in subparagraph G. Thank you.
My apologies, you're right. All the paragraphs were introduced, so I open the floor to paragraph G on Suriname and looking to the Standing Committee members. I have New Zealand, followed by Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. This relates, I guess, to the Suriname issue, but also more generally through some of the other issues, is that in many instances parties appear not to have followed Resolution 1210, RevCop 15, by allowing trade of Appendix 1 species from unregistered facilities. We also probably need to clarify the definition of Purpose Code B that crops up in this particular case. We see in a number of papers examples in this paper that Purpose Code B is being used, and I'm not sure that that's being used in the way that it was originally meant. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll respond to that, Oceania, and perhaps the Secretariat will help me, but my understanding is that there will be discussion of Purpose Code B when we have a further document on a discussion of Purpose Code B, and so there may be action taken there. There's a recommendation on that one to continue work to look at that source code. So I note your concern. I think we can deal with it in another agenda item. And I will call on Brazil.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. As in our capacity as regional coordinator, Suriname asked us to make an intervention, so I will make this intervention on behalf of Suriname. The Republic of Suriname reaffirms its strong commitment to the principles and obligations of the CITES. We recognize the critical role that CITES plays in ensuring that international trade in wildlife is conducted in a legal, sustainable, and traceable manner, and we remain dedicated to full compliance with its provisions. Suriname acknowledges the reports of the Standing Committee regarding compliance matters and appreciates the recommendation aimed at strengthening our national implementation of CITES regulation. We also recognize the importance of ensuring that all trade in CITES listed species aligns with Article 3 and 4 of the Convention. In this regard, we wish to confirm that the Management Authority of Suriname has followed the recommendation of the Scientific Authority and has established a zero export quota for Ara Sclopterus since 2022. This precautionary measure reflects our commitment to science-based decision-making in the long-term conservation of the species. Furthermore, to enhance transparency and strengthen national capacity in CITES implementation, Suriname formally extends an invitation to the CITES Secretariat to conduct an in-country assessment and verification mission. This mission will provide valuable technical support to evaluate current practices, ensuring compliance and with CITES requirements, and identify areas for further improvements. Suriname looks forward to continued cooperation with the CITES Secretariat, the Standing Committee, and our regional and international partners as we work together to uphold the principles of the conservation and responsible wildlife trade. Thank you.
Thank you. I call on the UK.
Thank you. Acknowledging the comments from colleagues in Oceania and Brazil on behalf of Suriname, we would support the mission as stated in the report.
I open the floor to observer parties. I have the USA.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States, we support the recommendation with regard to trade in live birds from Suriname. Additionally, noting with serious concern the information reported in this document concerning such trade, and that it appears not to be in compliance with the requirements of the Convention, we would also support the committee requesting the Secretariat to issue a notification to the parties advising importing parties to be particularly vigilant with regard to CITES documents issued by Suriname and take steps to ensure that such trade is being conducted in accordance with the requirements of the Convention. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I call on Senegal.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have listened closely to Brazil's intervention, which had points on a zero quota for the species. I am a specialist in wildlife, and the scream between birds, or the call is a way of communicating. So these animals, when they are passeriformes, will be used to sing for the pleasure of their masters. So we have to think it's much better that we have birds singing to make love to one another than to do that for the pleasure of humans. And so I think it's important that we have this mission.
Thank you. I will turn the floor to any observer organizations. And then I think I will just consult with the Secretariat for a minute on the suggestion from the USA in terms of a notification. Okay, I will sort of sum up where we are. I have heard from the Standing Committee members and others that there is support for the recommendations in paragraph G, and that Suriname has already said they invite such a mission. So we can adopt, Standing Committee could agree to paragraph G. As to the U.S.'s request for a notification to importing countries, my understanding is the Secretariat will take note of this, but we don't want to set a precedent that this becomes a regular action. So I think them taking note of it and then addressing it as they go on their mission would be the appropriate way forward. So with that, I look to the Standing Committee for agreement on this one. I see nodding heads. We move on. The next one will be regarding exports of Macaca fascicularis from Cambodia, paragraph H, and it has been introduced, so I turn to the Standing Committee members for any interventions. I turn to observer parties. Observer organizations. This is where I have the Alliance for Animal, and then I forget the second word, in Canada, Ron Ornstein.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. For the Secretariat's information, the organization is the Animal Alliance of Canada. So just whatever version that comes out. And again, I do apologize that I began this inadvertently yesterday when I should not have done so. I know that this item is going to be coming up again in document 35, which actually has a stronger recommendation. The Secretariat is recommending a suspension of trade of macaca from Cambodia, which we support. And we just, at this point, we would just like to note that this is very much an ongoing issue of concern. We would note that a shipment of this species from Cambodia to Canada is actually taking place place, I believe, pretty much as we speak. It's either due to land in Canada yesterday or today. I know Animal Alliance expressed its concern that this would actually be taking place during the Standing Committee meeting. We would prefer that it had been deferred based on the outcome of what recommendations from this document or document 35. But once again, we consider this a very serious matter. It's a matter of proper compliance with the treaty under a major.
Can I ask you to conclude, Ron,
yes,
please?
Yes, just to say that we do support the recommendation in Doc 35 and should be borne in mind in connection with this document. Thank you very much.
So to conclude on this one, I'm looking for the Standing Committee. I've heard support for paragraph H and the recommendation in there. Can the Standing Committee agree to this? Yes. Seeing nodding heads, it's H and I. I have Cambodia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Cambodia is fully cooperate with this recommendation, and we very pleased to invite the CITES Secretariat and might be some of the relevant party to come and visit the breeding farm facility in Cambodia, and also with review some of the relevant activity of the Cambodia compliance. So we are welcome CITES Secretariat to visit Cambodia as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Cambodia, for your support of that visit and the recommendations. With that, the Standing Committee agrees to paragraphs H and I. And we'll move on to the next one, which is regarding trade imported from Guyana by importing parties, paragraphs J, K, and L. So I will open the floor to Standing Committee members. We'll open the floor to observer parties. And I will open the floor to observer organizations. So this is one of those cases where I'm not hearing much discussion and silence. I look to the Standing Committee. Is that silence, now I'm seeing the nodding heads, that they can agree to the recommendations in J, K, and L. My apologies. There was an update from the Secretariat when they introduced the document that Cyprus has reported, so we can eliminate them from paragraph K. So we accept J, K, and L with that change to paragraph K with the deletion of Cyprus. Seeing agreement on that? Thank you. Move on to the next one, which is regarding guidance on the scope and application of recommendations to suspend trade, paragraph M. So I'm looking for the Standing Committee to respond to this one, and basically the information for this is concluded in Annex 1 to the document. I have the UK.
Thank you, Chair. We support this draft decision being put forward to the COP. We have some slight drafting suggestions which we can make now if that's helpful.
Yes, that would be helpful. Read them slowly so we can capture them, hopefully, on the first try.
Yes. So on the third line, where it says, in specimens of all CITES listed species, we'd strike the all. And then later on, after the reference to Resolution Conf 14.3, where it says, on CITES compliance procedures, we'd add a comma to say, including standard terminology for describing suspensions, and then continue on. Thank you.
So I'm looking to hear from standing committee members on support of this draft decision with the recommendation, with the amendments made by the UK. I will open the discussion to observer parties wishing to speak. Any observer organizations? Oh, I do have some parties. Thank you. Sorry. Mexico.
Gracias, señora. Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the draft decision in Annex 1 of the document, Mexico considers that it's necessary to analyze the context of the suspensions so that the Standing Committee can have the necessary elements to define its scope and application. And that is why we propose, with the support of Canada, 2 additional decisions and amendments to the draft of the document. The new decision directed at to the Secretariat is 20AA. The Secretariat will prepare an analysis of the history of recommendations to suspend trade or of trade with for the purposes of for commercial purposes in CITES species specimens with a party subject to a compliance process, including, amongst others, the legal considerations, for example, consistency with the obligations of the text of the convention, benefits, repercussions, adverse effects on third parties, in particular with regard to suspension of trade in all CITES species for consideration by the Standing Committee. The new decision directed to the Standing Committee is 20BB. The Standing Committee shall take into account analysis prepared by the Secretariat under Decision 20AA and shall issue its recommendations for the consideration of COP21. And the amendments to the draft of the document, 20XX, with the support of the Secretariat, the Standing Committee shall prepare, and we will remove consider, and we would replace it with shall prepare a draft guidance on, and we continue with the text, and then where there is a mention of all CITES listed species, we remove all and we add one or more species. And where it says compliance in accordance with procedures, we'd say consistent with paragraph 30 of the resolution. And we've sent this in writing to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico, for that. Those are substantive edits and additions, and so I'll come back to this because we may be thinking of seeing a COM document and trying to see that in writing for Standing Committee members to really get the scope of that, but I'll see what Secretariat advises me and Standing Committee members say. So thank you. Probably have to come back to you because that was a bit quick, and don't write that fast. Okay, I have the USA.
Thank you, Chair. With regard to the recommendation M in this document, we would support the suggested amendments proposed by the representative of Europe. Additionally, we recommend that the draft decision be amended for clarity using non-binding language consistent with the language in paragraph 30 of the resolution. And so we would suggest the phrase agreed in accordance be changed to decided consistent, so that it would read subject to a compliance procedure decided consistent with paragraph 30 of Resolution Conf 14.3 Rev Cop 19. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will open the floor to, I had it open to observer parties. I will now open it to continue observer parties or observer organizations. Not seeing any requests. Let me go back to talk to the Secretariat about the suggestion. Oh, I have Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As there are several parties that have amendments to the text, we would take you up on the suggestion to have a comm doc and maybe have it with all the suggestions of the 3 parties who spoke so we can carefully look into it because there are substantial changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Belgium. I will consult with the Secretariat now if that suggestion is possible. Getting agreement from the Secretariat, and so I propose that we have Mexico and Canada with their edits, and then I've heard edits from the UK, and I've heard edits from the US, that the 3 of them work together to put together, give those edits to the Secretariat, and we will put out a comm document. And I think that's fair because that will be translated in all 3 languages, and we can look at this decision because I think it is important, and Mexico's and Canada's edits would add more work to the Secretariat, so I think we have to take that into consideration. Okay, so I think we table this one for now, and then we move on to till we have the comm document, and then we move on to paragraph N, which is regarding the development and adoption of a compliance action plan template. And so there again, I point you to paragraph 29H of Annex, they're proposing amendments to Resolution Comp 14.3 on CITES compliance procedures. So I'm looking for comments on this one from the Standing Committee members. Paragraph N. Not seeing any comments from Standing Committee. I open the floor to observer parties. I have Canada.
Thank you, Chair. And Canada agrees with the recommendations and think it would be useful to provide a compliance action plan template for parties' use. We understand this template is to be an optional use for parties should they find it useful in preparing these plans. So in that regard, we do have some very minor amendments to the Annex 2 compliance action plan template. I will go through them very slowly. If you will allow me. So starting at the beginning, we think it would be worthwhile adding optional in front of the title. So optional compliance action plan template. In the first paragraph, which begins the following template, at the end of that sentence, where it reads to achieve compliance, we would add with the obligations of the convention. We note a number of references in the document to action plan. We think it's worthwhile putting compliance in front of those references, just to be clear, so compliance action plan throughout. In the second paragraph, reference to paragraph 29, which is found in the first sentence in the second line in the English version. We would just add the H for the precision of the reference, so in accordance with paragraph 29H. Probably should be consistent with paragraph 29H. And then our final suggestion is in the third paragraph, the one sentence that reads, "It is also important that relevant actors and stakeholders are consulted." After consulted, we would want to add some precision by including by the party concerned when developing the compliance action plan. And that would be all of the suggested changes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. That's pretty clear. I think the Secretariat has captured those. They're not greatly substantive, but add clarity. So I will look to the Standing Committee if, because I'm not hearing any non-support for this recommendation. So I'm looking to the Standing Committee to agree to the recommendation in H with the suggested amendments to Annex 2 proposed by Canada. So if I can, I'm getting nodding heads and agreement. So I can conclude this and that we agree to paragraph H with the amendments to the annex by Canada. And with that, let me check. I think we have included everything in this document, so appreciate that. And we now move on to, I have New Zealand and followed by the Maldives. Yes, I forgot this one would come up.
Thank you, Chair. We agree with the Secretariat's recommendations adopted this morning. However, Oceania supports the concerns raised by the Maldives in respect to irregularities in the trade of oceanic white-tip shark, Carcharodontis longimanus, that are discussed in paragraphs 63 to 67 of this document. These concerns are neither trivial nor ill-founded. This critically endangered pelagic shark lives mainly above deep ocean basins rather than in coastal waters, with the vast majority of the species living in areas beyond national jurisdiction or over deep water towards the extreme edges of the EZs. Significant volumes of this species continue to be traded internationally, despite all tuna RFMOs having had retention bans for the species in place for years, and CMS listed the species on its Appendix 1 in 2020. And the CMS listing requires signatories to the CMS Convention to endeavour to strictly protect the migratory species by, amongst other things, prohibiting the taking of such species, with very little scope for exceptions. We recognise it's not the responsibility of the Secretariat to police the quality of legal acquisition findings made by parties ahead of them trading specimens internationally. However, we believe that the Maldives make a very strong case, and we believe the Standing Committee should investigate apparent non-compliance with Article 4.2b of the CITES Convention. This requires the management authority of the state of export to be satisfied that the specimen was not obtained in contravention of the laws of that state or for the protection of the flora and fauna. And in cases of IFS, parties should take into account their obligations as members of RFMOs and or CMS, even if the specimens were obtained in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We are not aware of any published NDF that supports the sustainable trade of this species. We note that the Secretariat raised the Maldives' concern with the key trading parties, but did not receive a response from any of them to justify their trade. We believe that the Standing Committee should now intervene and invoke the provisions of Resolution 14.3, RevCorp 16, and direct the Secretariat to further investigate the concerns raised by the Maldives and review all IFS and exporter-importer trades of oceanic white tips since their listing on the CITES Appendix 2 came into force in September 2014 following COP16. We suggest a decision from this meeting that the Secretariat concentrate on examining both the legal acquisition findings and non-detriment findings for commercial trades of this species, but exclude those transactions using purpose code S for scientific samples and Q for travelling exhibitions, which mainly relate to fins used in a training workshop in the Oceania region held in Fiji. Thank you.
Thank you, and we now have a suggestion by Oceania of additional recommendations. I'll probably come back to you for exact text, or if there's support for that, perhaps a drafting group. I have a request now from parties, but before I turn to parties, I hadn't opened it up. Were there any other standing committee members wanting to speak to what has been suggested by Oceania? We can always come back to, I have Israel.
Yes, just very briefly, Chair, we echo the comments by New Zealand, by Oceania.
I have the UK.
Thank you, Chair. Similarly, we would echo comments and think this matter warrants further investigation. Thank you.
I have Panama, and then I'll also call on the Maldives.
Buenos días, muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We would like to express our support for the concerns raised by the Maldives with respect to the lack of information on unauthorized trade in on this species of shark, the oceanic white-tipped shark. This is a matter of concern that really should be investigated under Article 13 because there are possibly systematic difficulties with respect for Article 4 or what is laid down in Article 8 with respect to the export of oceanic white-tipped sharks. We should contact those parties and ensure that there is information provided by the parties so that we can follow the matter up at the next meeting of the SC. Thank you.
Thank you, Panama. I'm cognizant of time, so I will ask the remaining speakers to basically, if they can, align or not align with the suggestions made by Oceania, and then we can move forward. So I have Belgium, and then I will turn to the Maldives and...
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do align ourselves with the previous speakers of the Standing Committee that this is an important issue, and we do not agree with the Secretariat's position that neither the Secretariat nor the Standing Committee have a mandate to assess the compliances in this matter. According to Article 13, paragraph 1 and 2, the countries concerned need to react to the Secretariat's inquiry regarding the concerns brought up by the Maldives. And their responses should contain information on the origin of the making of an LAF and or an NDF if required. And on Resolution 14.6, paragraph 3, Roman I, where it is specified that in the case of an introduction of the sea, the party involved should satisfy itself that any regulation regarding the conservation or management of marine species that may result from other treaties or conventions were taken into account prior to the acquisition of specimens. So therefore, we also have some suggested recommendation to go in this line, but we can agree, or we can look into the suggestions made from the New Zealand to make them combined. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm thinking there may be a need for a small drafting group. I will entertain some discussion by parties, but I ask you to be brief so that we can just sort of get support or non-support for the recommendation put forward. So I turn to the Maldives and followed by Canada.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to support the statement made by New Zealand.
And as detailed in document 33.1, the government of the Maldives submitted a letter to the Secretariat concerning trade in the Appendix 2 listed oceanic white-tip shark. The letter detailed questions around how LAFs can be possible for a species that is widely fully protected, along with evidence of significant seizures of oceanic white-tip fins without CITES permits in Hong Kong SAR, with multiple seizures being made from exports from a subset of CITES parties. This illegal trade, including a lack of permitting, is a concern appropriate for follow-up action investigation under Article 13, as these potentially represent systematic failures to comply with Article 4 or a failure to enforce provisions of the treaty as directed by Article 8.1. However, document 33.1 does not propose any direct action in response to the seizure data, which we find concerning. We appreciate the Secretariat's outreach on LAFs for ABNJ imports and the interpretation of multilateral measures outlined in paragraphs 63 to 67. We urge similar action for countries identified in the publicly available data on multiple confiscated shipments that we had provided to the Secretariat. Appropriate follow-up action into these cases is necessary to address the illegal trade of these critically endangered species. We recommend that the Secretariat follow up with parties mentioned in paragraph 65 who have not responded to the inquiries on the LAF issue, with responses and appropriate actions reported at the next committee meetings. Additionally, we request that the Secretariat engage with the parties listed in our letter as exporters of repeatedly confiscated illegal fins, ensuring their responses and any necessary follow-up actions are submitted to the committee. We remain in your hands for how to proceed in addressing this, whether drafting recommendation or any other matters. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Maldives. I have several parties wishing to speak, but I will ask you to be very brief because we're very cognizant of the time. So I have Canada.
Thank you, Chair. To be brief, we recognize the concerns that are being raised and feel that a drafting group to prepare possible recommendations might be the best way forward. In doing so, we would caution that that drafting group does focus on those obligations under the CITES Convention, as we do not feel that CITES scope extends to monitoring compliance with other treaties. However, we do recognize that there is some room here for recommendations regarding NDFs and LAFs, legal acquisition findings. Thank you.
Thank you. I turn to Ecuador.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just to support Panama and the proposal made by Oceania. We would agree to there being a drafting group set up. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Senegal yet, and then I think I will move on to non-party observers. I asked Senegal to be brief and where they align. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senegal supports Maldives and Oceania. We did in the past participate with the Maldives in efforts to get this species listed, and we would like to let you know that we in Senegal have a zero export quota for the oceanic white-tip shark, of which the Secretariat has been notified. Thank you.
I turn to observer organizations. Not seeing any requests, I will consult with the Secretariat on the best way forward, which may be, as Canada and others have said, a small drafting group. Okay, I'm going to strike a small standing drafting group to deal with recommendations on oceanic whitetip. And basically, I'm not going to open it up, but based on the countries that had suggested that they would be interested in putting forward text for a recommendation. So hopefully I will get this correct. I would like to ask Oceania to chair that small drafting group. I see them nodding. I would like to ask Belgium to participate in that, the UK, Panama, and then the Maldives and Canada. Would that be acceptable to the Standing Committee? I see nodding heads, and so I will ask them to do their work. I will double check on one thing, because I think we need a mandate. Well, it's a drafting group. So they're basically to look at recommendations and consider the discussion here in plenary on oceanic whitetip, particularly, as Canada has noted, paying attention to things that have to do with compliance with Article 13, which is the legal acquisition findings and the non-detriment findings. And so that's what the drafting group will do and come back to us in plenary. And with that, I think I can now conclude hold on. My admission, of course, I invite the Secretariat to participate in that drafting group. Apologies. Okay, I can now conclude the first agenda item from the morning. We're behind, and we move on to the next agenda item, which is document 64, Spix's Macaw, and I turn to Brazil to introduce this document.
Thank you, Chair. This proposition is of significant importance to Brazil and represents a crucial step in ensuring the conservation and successful reintroduction of the Spix macaw, a species that has been extinct in the wild since the 1990s, relying their future exclusively on the ex-situ breeding facilities. Brazil has successfully reintroduced other endangered bird species into the wild and is committed to ensuring coordinated actions through the Spix macaw population management program among breeding facilities to increase the chance of success of the reintroduction of the birds into nature. Now, given the extreme delicate situation of the macaws and many challenges in the communication between the Brazilian government and some private breeding facilities, we believe it is important to maintain dialogue among management authorities. And after fruitful rounds of dialogue with the relevant countries and the Secretariat, which participate in conversations with Brazil in good faith and a spirit of cooperation, Brazil prepared a new draft recommendation which we present as follows, and I read. The Standing Committee is invited to take note of the information provided in the present document and invite Brazil, Belgium, Denmark, Germany, India, Switzerland, and other relevant parties to engage in a dialogue to enhance exchange of information with respect to the specimens of Cyanopsita spixi held in captivity in their territory in support to the Spix macaw population management program, and to report back to the Standing Committee at its 79th meeting. Thank you very much, and I hope we can achieve consensus in this important topic. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brazil. I open up this document to the Standing Committee members and basically looking for reactions to this new proposed recommendation to the document. As chair, I just seek a clarification. Excuse me. This new recommendation would replace all the recommendations A, B, C, and D, or I'm seeing nodding. Okay, I just wanted to be sure. So now I will open it up. We have a new recommendation that replaces the previous recommendations in document 64. So we are speaking to the new recommendation put forward by Brazil. So I have Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We want to express our thanks for the suggestion made by Brazil and express our gratitude for the very constructive dialogue we had between Brazil and the other relevant parties, and we fully support the suggested recommendation. Thank you.
I have the USA.
Thank you, Chair. The North America region supports the recommendation as amended by Brazil. Thank you.
I have Honduras.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of Central America, and we simply wish to say that we agree with Brazil's recommendation. We are very interested in this whole question of reintroducing macaws into the wild. Thank you.
I have Japan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Japan would like to support the recommendations in this document made by Brazil. Thank you.
I have New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. We also agree with the recommendations put forward by Brazil. We consider this as a really important issue. It affects the Oceania region for different life forms, like reptiles in particular, but yeah, it's certainly a very significant issue for our region. Thank you.
Thank you. In the essence of time, I have two more standing committee members wishing to speak. Just align yourself, either support or non-support. The Dominican Republic.
Thank you. We support the recommendation made by Brazil. Thank you.
Parties requesting the floor, India.
Thank you, Chair. India values Brazil's concern for the conservation of the speaker macaws and fully supports the need for a dialogue with Brazil and other countries involved in the conservation breeding. Thank you, Chair.
I have Germany.
Thank you, Chair. We would also like to join others in thanking Brazil, and in particular on behalf of Germany, we'd like to thank Brazil for our various very good exchanges since at SC77 and since then, also yesterday. We continue to stand ready to support the conservation of this species in any way we can. And in this spirit, in line with what has been said by the EU and member states, we fully support the suggestion from Brazil. Thank you very much.
Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Switzerland fully supports the new text. Thank you.
Mexico.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are a country of origin of this species, and we certainly recognize and sympathize with the concerns expressed by Brazil. We support their recommendation, and we think that Resolution 13 and 9 on ex situ reproduction and conservation in situ can really help countries involved in dealing with the species. Thank you.
I have several parties wishing to speak, but please be brief. Ecuador.
Thank you, Madam. We simply wish to say that Ecuador supports the proposal made by Brazil. Thank you.
Argentina.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam. We consider this matter to be of the utmost importance, and we therefore support Brazil's proposal. Thank you.
Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support Brazil's proposal.
Then I will turn to one or two interventions from observer organizations because I have them requesting already, but I hadn't called yet. So I turn to the two interventions I will take are from the Bird Breeders, Green Zoological Research and Rescue Center in India.
Thank you, Chair. GZRRC, based in India, is committed to wildlife conservation, including species preservation, animal welfare, and habitat restoration. Since 2023, we've partnered with ACTP to support the reintroduction of the Spix's macaw back to Brazil. We've recently facilitated the transport of 41 Spix's macaw to Brazil for their reintroduction, and we emphasize that these efforts are non-commercial and solely for conservation purpose. In the spirit of transparency, we invite Brazil and the CITES Secretariat to visit our facility and to observe the conservation efforts firsthand. We urge all stakeholders to engage in constructive dialogue to strengthen the reintroduction program for this species. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I will call on ACTP.
Thank you, Madam Chair. ACTP is a non-profit organization. We have been working with Spix macaw for over 18 years. There are currently around 350 birds in the world, 230 hatched in our facilities. In 2019, we were able to build a state-of-the-art release center in Brazil, and we released 20 birds in the wild. Our work also encompasses the restoration of 2,800 hectares in Caatinga. We're especially glad to report to the committee that 11 birds were born in captivity in Brazil, in our facility, and 7 were born in natural, in wild environment from the birds that were released. Madam Chair, dear colleagues, it's very happy for me to tell you that last week I personally conducted the receive of 41 Spix macaws to Brazil. So we brought 41 Spix macaw back, and they will be prepared to release. It will happen together with the government of Brazil, who I'd like to thank, and with Greens from India, who I'd like to thank also. Thank you, guys. It was a very challenging and successful operation. More than 59 organizations worked together to accomplish this mission. In total, 101 birds were sent to our release center. That is around 1/3 of the global population. To complete, Madam Chair, and not to be long, I would just like to express that this process aligns directly with CITES means. We are strongly working with the government of India, Brazil, and Germany to increase the captive population and to release them on the wild.
Can you please wrap up?
Yes, I was completing, Madam. So I'd like to thank to Brazil and the other partners for the new recommendation, and we are willing to cooperate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have several other organizations wishing to speak. In the fairness, I will take one. We've heard from the breeders. I will take from WCS, but I please ask you to be brief because I think we have a conclusion here.
Very brief. We appreciate and fully concur with the concerns of the government of Brazil regarding Cyanopsidas spixii. We're pleased to see the consensus of importing countries and Brazil, but we are very concerned with the broader issues this raises. Much more needs to be done to ensure that any trade in critically endangered Appendix 1 endemic species, such as this one, is in full consultation with and with the support of the range state and that any allowed trade in captive bred Appendix 1 species truly benefits the conservation of the species in the wild. Thank you, Chair.
With that, I'm hearing support for Brazil's revised recommendation. I will turn to the Secretariat to read out the decision, the recommendation, and then look to the Standing Committee. I think I've seen all agreement, but I want to be sure.
Thank you, Chair. So instead of the recommendations set out in 64, in the document 64, the Standing Committee is invited to agree to the following. The Standing Committee takes note of the information provided in the present document and invite Brazil, Belgium, Denmark, Germany, India, and Switzerland and other relevant parties to engage in a dialogue to enhance exchange of information with respect to the specimens of the C. spixi held in captivity in their territory in support of the Spix's macaw population management program, and to report back to the Standing Committee at its 79th meeting. Thank you, Chair.
So I look for the Standing Committee to give me nodding heads, thumbs up that there's agreement on the adoption of this, of what was the text just read out. I'm seeing that, and I think we can conclude this. And then this also concluded 33.1. So we finished those two agenda items now. And we will move. We are moving on to document 61.1, resolution Comp 1210, Rev Cop 15, on the registration of operations that breed Appendix 1 animal species in captivity for commercial purposes. I look to the Secretariat. Oh, sorry, this is a working group report. I look to the USA to introduce this document. Apologies.
Thank you, Chair. At its 19th meeting, the Conference of the Parties adopted Decision 19.181 on review of Resolution Conf 12.10, Rev Cop 15, which directed the Standing Committee to consider document COP 19, Doc 55, and review the application of Resolution Conf 12.10, Rev Cop 15, for situations where there is a change in the nature of the operation or in the type of products being produced for export, and other matters raised in the document as appropriate, and provide its recommendations to COP20. At its 76th meeting, the Standing Committee established an intersessional working group comprising 31 parties and 20 observer organizations. The working group undertook several rounds of discussions and also considered comments made during discussion of the interim report at SC 77. The working group members generally supported suggestions to improve the application of Resolution Conf 12.10 Rev Cop 15 for the benefit of Appendix 1 animals, while also recognizing the need to balance administrative burden with efficacy. Based on the discussions, the working group recommends amendments to Resolution Conf 12.10, which can be found in paragraphs 18 through 23 of the present document. Broadly, the revisions are to provide illustrative examples of what constitutes a major change in the nature of an operation, direction to the Secretariat to update the register when it receives updated information from a management authority, clarification on the information to be included in the register, a revision to question 11 in Annex 1 on the information to be provided in a registration request, to request parties to specify any products excluded from export for the operation where applicable, acknowledge the authority of a party within whose jurisdiction an operation is registered to amend a registration to reduce its scope, and language to amend paragraph 5J, to ensure a transparent, evidence-based set of standards in the exceptional case where a party has reason to believe that a registered operation does not comply with the provisions of Resolution Conf 10.16 Rev Cop 19 or the original conditions for registration. On a couple of the items discussed in the working group, members were unable to reach consensus, and those items are also noted in the document. The working group invites the Standing Committee to submit these amendments as well as its recommendations to COP20 and consider whether the work under Decision 19.181 has been completed, and if so, recommend it for deletion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And thank you to the working group for their work here. I will now open the floor to the Standing Committee members. The recommendations are contained in paragraph 25, and that's what our discussion will center on. So I turn it to the Standing Committee. I have Israel.
Thank you, Chair. We were members of this working group, and we want to thank the United States for leading us so ably, and we support all the recommendations as they appear in the document. Thank you.
I'm not seeing any other Standing Committee members requesting to speak. I've got the UK.
Thank you, Chair. We can support the decisions A through D as set out in the document. I know this was a point of discussion in the working group, but we have a preference to replace the word major where it appears in new paragraph 5G with significant to be more consistent in language used elsewhere, but can agree to the text as drafted if that's the preference of other Standing Committee members. In paragraph 5G, we also propose replacing the phrase major change in breeding stock with a significant change in the number or composition of the breeding stock, and deleting the semicolon etc at the end of the illustrative list to not duplicate on the EG at the start of the brackets, just to make this list a bit clearer to follow. I can read that whole paragraph out with those changes in if that's helpful. Yep, okay, so the 5G would then read, the management authority, in collaboration with the scientific authority, shall monitor the management of each registered captive breeding operation under its jurisdiction and advise the Secretariat in the event of any significant change in the nature of operation, open brackets, e.g. a significant change in the number or composition of the breeding stock, semicolon, change in marking methods, semicolon, significant change in breeding methods, close brackets, or in the types of products being produced for export.
I will ask, thank you. I will now ask the Standing Committee members to either express their support for the amended changes you've heard from the UK or non-support, and to keep the document, the recommendation as written. I've got the DRC.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On behalf of the Central African region, we would like to highlight that the group is suggesting, we have taken note of the document 61.1 on amendments to Res Conf 1210, but we have the following amendments for Annex I, that we have a replacement for the detailed description, and that it should be accompanied by a model. And on point 16, we would like to have some clarification of the expression rigorous. This clarification could then be integrated into the text of the annex for greater clarification. The group can see that the document mentions Annex 3, but we only have that here. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I now will open up to observer parties, and I have the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam. We appreciate the work done by this working group and the document presented, and we still have a question as to the point G, and namely any major change in the nature of an operation. For example, major change in breeding stock, or as suggested by the UK, a significant change in the number of composition of breeding stock. In this regard, it is still unclear as to what constitutes a major or a significant change. In this regard, we'd like to receive clarification, perhaps by the legal team of the Secretariat, or otherwise, if there is clarity on that, to ensure that in the future management authorities can be in full compliance and understand unequivocally as to what and when they need to report if changes occur. Thank you.
I call on India.
Thank you, Chair. India wishes to commend the work carried out by the intersessional working group on this document. India supports the amendment proposed in this resolution, but we have a minor edit in para 5I with the addition of words in line 2 to include or modified conditions. I repeat, or modified conditions after the words the original conditions. So this would mean, I'm just reading the first two lines in 5I. Any party believing that a registered operation does not comply with the provisions of the resolution COP 10.6 and Rev COP 19, or the original conditions, or the modified conditions for registration of operations. And then the para continues. Thank you. Now, the intent of this is to, will enable the party to capture any amended condition with regard to the registration of the operations which were approved and brought to the notice of the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. I call on the EU.
Thank you. The EU and its member states agree with most of the proposed amendments to Resolution 12.10, with the exception of the amendments that aim at extending the powers of the Standing Committee to decide on, and third parties to ask for an ex post restriction of the registration to exclude specific types of products. We propose the following changes to the amendments proposed in the report of the Intersessional Working Group in paragraph 23 of the report, in relation to the old paragraph 5I of the resolution Conf 12.10. Firstly, we do not agree with adopting the following addition to paragraph 5I, and I quote, or amended to exclude or amend the types of products from the registration for the operation. This comes after proposed to the Standing Committee that the operation be deleted from the register. Secondly, we do not agree with the similar addition to the same paragraph, several lines below, and I quote, or amended to exclude or amend the types of products from the registration for the operation. This text comes after proposed to the Standing Committee that the operation be deleted from the register. Thirdly, relating to the next sentence, we do not agree with the additions, and I quote, to amend, and then, I quote, or to re-amend. We consider this to be an extremely rare scenario, if any, that registration requirements are linked to the issue whether a captive breeding facility excludes a particular type of product for export. Exclusion of particular products only seems to be an appropriate action for host countries if a breeding operation, as a consequence of extending its product scope, no longer meets the requirements for registration. It had compliance with Resolution 10.16. We are currently not aware of a scenario where this would be the case, and the correct procedure to address any shortcomings of a breeding facility regarding its ongoing obligation, such as marking and traceability, and not the requirements for registration, if they are not remedied by the party hosting the breeding operation.
Can I ask you to please wrap up?
Yes, that the correct procedure would be the compliance procedure. Thank you.
I will call on Mexico yet, and then I think I will close this to observer parties.
Gracias, señora Presidenta. Thank you, Madam Chair. In picking up on the EU statement, we don't agree with the amendments in 2023 of this document, where there is reference to the Standing Committee deciding which species a company might make available for sale. As we have already said, once there is a registration, that means that the management authority has actually taken measures with respect to the sale of the species, its parts and derivatives, and know that it is legal and sustainable. And there were only 6 of 31 parties responded to the consultation, and Mexico was the only developing country present. As there is no consensus on a number of paragraphs, we think that the proposal made for a clean copy should include language in square brackets, as there is so much disagreement. We think that the Standing Committee should really consider just those proposals which did enjoy consensus when the working group was considering the matter. Thank you.
I have China, but I would ask you to be brief because I had closed the parties. I will allow you to speak, but really, we're falling way behind now.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. China, Echo, Mexico. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have a request from Belgium on the Standing Committee, so Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We agree to all the amendments or opposition to amendments as outlined by the EU, and we also do not agree to the request from India to add this element of modified conditions in paragraph 5I. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Israel, and then I will try to consult with the Secretariat on the way forward.
Just very briefly, we support India's recommendation, and we do not support the changes that the EU has made, as this paragraph I is talking about what could be proposed to the Standing Committee. It's not talking about a final decision, so it doesn't need to be so restrictive.
Thank you. I will, on this one, not open up the floor to observer organizations because I think we've had quite a lot of discussion and I'm seeking a way forward. Since we've heard substantive edits to both the working group report and its recommendations, I propose I strike a small drafting group again, largely composed of Standing Committee members. I would ask the U.S. first if they would be willing to chair this small drafting group. I see a nodding head, in which case I will ask Belgium to participate. Israel, the US we have India, the EU, and the UK. Is that acceptable way forward for the Standing Committee? Okay, thank you, and we'll hear back from the drafting group. Thank you. The mandate is to look at the recommendations and the amendments that we heard here in the discussion and take them into consideration and revise accordingly. Okay, let's see if we can get this next one at least introduced and perhaps done. 61.2, which is implementation of paragraph 5J. And I will call on the Secretariat to introduce this document.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At SC 77, the Standing Committee invited the Secretariat to provide guidance on how the Management Authority can assess whether a captive breeding operation makes a continuing meaningful contribution according to the conservation needs of the species. This is paragraph 5J of Resolution Conf 1210. The Secretariat reviewed 406 applications to include operations in the CITES register and identified 7 conservation strategies based on these applications, as well as other guidance, including IUCN guidelines. The Secretariat presented these conservation strategies and guidelines to the Animals Committee, that indicated a general support for using these as guidance for the interpretation of paragraph 5J. And finally, for ex-situ breeding operation, the Standing Committee is invited to encourage parties to implement Resolution Conf 13.9 on encouraging cooperation between parties with ex-situ breeding operations and those with in-situ conservation programs. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I open the floor to the Standing Committee members to comment on the recommendations in paragraph 15 of the document. I have Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We agree with the recommendations set out in the document with one amendment to recommendation C. At the end of that recommendation, we would like to add the following language. So to add at the end of the sentence, as appropriate, comma, according to the conservation needs of the species, full stop. We feel this is appropriate because the conservation strategies are not limited to in-situ conservation, and appropriate conservation measures are case-specific and should be according to the conservation needs of the species as per Resolution Conf 12.10. Thank you.
Thank you. I have the UK.
Thank you, Chair. To keep it brief, we support the recommendations put forward by the Secretariat and can support the additional part in recommendation C from the EU as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I will turn to observer parties. The Russian Federation. Oh, I have the U.S. as Standing Committee. They come first, then I'll turn to the Russian. No? The Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam. We thank the Secretariat for the document information provided on the 7 conservation strategies. With regard to these strategies, we believe that the draft recommendations, that's point 15b, little I, there is insufficient clarity as to whether all 7 of the strategies are expected to be implemented or only one of them or several of them. Could the Secretariat or you provide clarification on this matter?
I give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Belgium pointed out, it is always according to the conservation needs of the species, so the conservation needs will have to be taken into account. So it's any of these conservation strategies. Those are all indications that you can use, and the basis of a decision would be the conservation of the needs of the species. So not all of them together. It can be just one, it can be several. It all depends on the conservation needs of the species. Thank you.
I open the floor to observer organizations. Oh, now I have the U.S. Requesting to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Speaking on behalf of the United States supports the draft amendments to paragraph 5J of Resolution Conf 1210 Rev Cop 15, found in paragraph 6 of the document. We concur that the resources found in paragraphs 7 and 8 of the document provide guidance to help parties implement paragraph 5J. However, while these resources are a good starting point, we believe that additional detail would be useful. For example, we do not believe that mere statements that the captive breeding facility will reduce pressure on wild populations or increase public awareness would be sufficient in their own to demonstrate a meaningful contribution to the conservation needs of the species. Therefore, we suggest amending the recommendation in paragraph 15b(i) of document SC 58 Doc 61.2 by adding the following text. The 7 conservation strategies referred to in registration applications received to date, if there is documentation of direct linkages to the conservation of wild populations. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I have India.
Thank you, Chair. India wishes to appreciate the Secretariat and the preparation of the document. India agrees to the amendment for the inclusion of the role of scientific authority in the paragraph 5J of Resolution Conf 12.10 Rev COP 15 in assessing the contribution of captive breeding operation of conservation needs of the species concerned. Additionally, the 7 guidance scenarios identified in recommendations will encourage ex situ breeding operations along with in situ conservation programs. Thank you, Chairman.
I have the Russian Federation. Since this is the second time you're speaking, I assume you have a response to what you heard from the Secretariat. So I would ask you to limit your intervention to that.
Thank you, Madam. Indeed, I thank the Secretariat for the response. In this case, we have an issue with regard to the possibility of financial contribution as to whether it would necessarily go to one particular, to the same species that is intended for protection. For instance, if a captive breeding operation facility makes a financial contribution to a conservation fund only, but does nothing to implement other strategies, we are wondering if such action should be deemed sufficient. There is a question of a possibility that the financial contribution may be used for a different species. So I'm also reflecting on the statement just made with regard to the documentation to be provided. That could be one of the ways that we could look at this, or otherwise specify that in the text of the draft decision, that draft recommendation, sorry, that it is about implementation of more than one of the 7 strategies, that one would be insufficient. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. I would like to ask the interpreters if they would indulge me and give me 10 more minutes, because I think we might be able to wrap this one up.
Yes, Madam Chair. Yes.
Saying yes, I have observer organizations requesting the floor. I will give it to one of them, and then I will consult with the Secretariat on a way forward, because we've heard some amendments and some discussion. I will turn to traffic.
Thank you, Chair. This intervention is on behalf of traffic and WWF. We support the proposed amendment to Resolution Conf 1210, Rev Cop 15, which would strengthen the role of scientific authorities in collaboration with management authorities to assess whether the captive breeding operations CITES regulations will make a continuing meaningful contribution according to the conservation needs of species concerned. In reviewing the 7 conservation strategies referenced in past registration applications, we have concerns about the robustness of some strategies as meaningful conservation contributions, and therefore consider that they require further refinement. Specifically, strategies 2, 3, and 4 may not always meet the threshold of a meaningful contribution. Genetic diversity within captive breeding populations does not necessarily translate to conservation benefits of wild populations. The reference to potential reintroduction lacks a clear and measurable link to species recovery efforts. Similarly, research that is not directly linked to improving the conservation status of wild populations may have limited conservation impact. Furthermore, while Strategy 1, reducing pressure on wild populations, is often cited, it should not be assumed as valid without supporting evidence. It should not be generalized across all species and circumstances. In some cases where captive breeding fails to meet demand, it can inadvertently contribute to illegal trade by facilitating the laundering of wild-caught specimens as captive bred if robust systems are not in place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to conclude discussion. I have two things I think we can summarize, and I'm still a bit confused on B, so I will consult with the Secretariat. But I basically have heard support from the Standing Committee agreeing to paragraph A with the proposed change from the Animals Committee in collaboration with the Scientific Authority. So do I see agreement with that from the Standing Committee? So we can accept A, and then we go to paragraph C, where we had a suggestion by Belgium as appropriate according to conservation needs of the species. At the end of that suggestion, that recommendation, I didn't hear and actually heard some further support for this in discussion of B. So I think the Standing Committee can agree to paragraph C as amended by Belgium. Seeing nodding heads. And then let me consult with the Secretariat on B, because I've had different suggestions there, and some of them are extensive and clarifications by the Russian Federation. To help the chair understand the change suggested by the United States to B, can I ask the United States to again read their language that they're suggesting to little I in paragraph B slowly so we capture it all?
Thank you, Chair. So it would be adding words after, currently it reads the 7 conservation strategies referred to in registration applications received to date. And so the additional language would be if there is documentation of direct linkages to the conservation of wild populations. Thank you, Chair.
And then I understand the rest of the paragraph text would stay. Okay. Guess I look to the I've got Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We think the way the US has proposed this may be very difficult to measure, as the conservation needs are species specific. We also want to remind the room about the agreement from the Animals Committee that these 7 strategies are deemed sufficient. We could understand that an applicant would need to provide some detail about one or more of the strategies that they want to use, that they just don't tick like a box saying, I will do that, but explain concretely what they will do. But if the text is to read that the documentation should prove a direct linkage to the conservation of wild populations, we feel this is not measurable and should therefore not be part of the text. Thank you.
I have the UK.
Thank you, Chair. We'd like to agree with the comments from the EU in terms of the practicality of that statement, so we'd prefer not to have the addition, and that in general we would have to look at things on a case-by-case basis. Thank you.
And then I call on I see the US maybe has a response to the language, perhaps mending it again.
Thank you, Chair. With sincere apologies, in my original intervention, I neglected to include the additional text that we had in our briefing document. So that would be, additional text would be including whether the strategies are being implemented and whether effectiveness is measurable through suitable indicators. So then our complete suggested addition would be, if there is documentation of direct linkages to the conservation of wild populations, comma, including whether the strategies are being implemented and whether effectiveness is measurable through suitable indicators. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I also would like to ask Russia if they have any specific, we've heard comments from them and clarification questions, but I did not hear any specific text from the Russian Federation, so I would go back to them if they have any specific text, and then I will try to resolve this.
Thank you, Madam. So at this point we see two options in sub-bullet I to sub-bullet B of 15. Prior to the words, the 7 conservation strategies, we could insert implementation of 2 or more of the 7 conservation strategies. So that's one option. Second option would be to look specifically at the point financial contribution to a conservation fund, and then in this case we would add financial contribution to a conservation fund, something along the lines of intended for the species bred by the facility, since it refers to the operation facility, to make sure that indeed the money goes to the conservation of the species that it is supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll get back to little I. I guess I want to just look at the Standing Committee. I think we have agreement then on paragraph B, 2 little i's, 2 little 3 i's, and 4. So 2, 3, and 4, I think I heard no comments to, so we can agree to that. And I'm left with BI, where I've got the US suggesting text. I've got Belgium concerned with that text in the EU, and then Russia has made some additional edits to little I. This is going to go to the COP, but this is going from the Standing Committee, so I'm trying to look for some consensus here on little I, and I don't know if it's worth perhaps sending a drafting group that would be the US, Belgium, and the Russian Federation and the Secretariat to look at, and the UK to look at this and come back to us, might be, rather than take up more time here, because I myself cannot see a compromise solution, so I think you need some time. So I will create a small drafting group with Belgium, the UK, the US, and the Russian Federation with assistance from the Secretariat to look at the edits that have been proposed, not new edits, but the edits that were discussed here, to work on B little I. Okay, thank you for that agreement. And with that, I will break for lunch. I'm sure the interpreters thank you for your indulgence, and we've concluded this one. I will remind folks to think about. We are probably now a half a day behind, that we pick up speed this afternoon and try to be shorter in our interventions. Thank you. Oh, I turn to the Secretariat for housekeeping announcements. Very important.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a reminder. There will be a working group on zoonotic diseases starting now in room 3, level -1, and the Finance and Budget Subcommittee, which will be meeting now also in room 12, level 2. Thank you, Chair.